choice? If you said this one or the quote unquote the Brown album, which is called The Band.
Because to me, this is before like rock stardom set in, like before they were on the cover of Time, before, drugs and alcohol become the problem that they eventually become, and the monsters start to come out under the door. I think this is the time where it was the most egalitarian. Particularly with this record, you see Richard Manuel actually has a lot of writing credits on this record.
Oh yeah,
and you don't really see that after this one. Like, and to me, I don't want to say they did anything weak. Like, I don't want to say that everything they did after the Brown record is bad, but they were never this good again, and they were never this influential. I mean, Roger Waters, say what you want about him, good, bad, or otherwise, but he's not wrong. I mean, this is the record that broke up Cream. I mean, this is where Clapton decided that he wanted to strike out on his own, and this is where you get him going to Delaney Bramlett and the Layla album and the first solo record. A lot of people say this is where you get my personal favorite Elton John record, Tumbleweed Connection. This is where a lot of Tumbleweed Connection, you could feel the influences in this. So, and it's funny because it's 4 Canadians and a guy from Arkansas really bringing Americana. Like, this is where you really start to get that Americana vibe. Like, we talked about the Grateful Dead. It's not too far away from where the 2 Grateful Dead records that are the Americana Dead records come out. And all of that good stuff comes out of like what they did with Dylan up in New York, and then what they come up with on their own. And like, to me, these are the 2 records that mean the most. And I didn't come to the band from these records first. I actually came to the band from The Last Waltz. My dad made me watch The Last Waltz when I was like my son's age.
Well, I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. I mean, that was my first Scorsese movie, honestly. So, and then I went back and I found these, and to me, these are the two best. And I actually, before we talked about this, I knew the Brown album better than I knew Big Pink. Not that I wasn't familiar with it, but giving this a few spins, like, I was really blown away. I totally get why it had the impact that it did. Like, it's just such a well-written, well-constructed record. And the thing that bothers me is that Robbie Robertson seems to get all the credit for the writing and the construction of all this stuff.
Here he goes.
But you don't get, to me, you don't get what is so beautiful about the band without the other 4 cats. So
absolutely not. So let's go there. And I was going to kick it over. I'm going to kick it over to Eric in a second, but let's go there since you brought it up. The big thing is, Levon Helm is like, Robbie didn't write all this stuff, and I, helped this, and I, kind of the Mike Love thing, like Mike Love did with Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Now, here's the difference is the proof is in the pudding. After the, Robbie Robertson left the band, Levon Helm did not write barely anything. His solo career, I think he co-wrote 1 song. Okay. So, he's making, and I'm not trying to, I'm just calling balls and strikes as I see him. The guy said he did this and did that, but yet the guy doesn't write songs.
Right. But
now, so what's the difference between maybe, hey, change the name to Fanny instead of Sally, because I knew a Fanny from back home. Does that change the song? Does that really,
by the same turn, how do you take full writing credit for Chest Fever? You don't, Richard, that song is all Garth Hudson. That song is Garth Hudson. Like, I don't understand how Garth Hudson doesn't have a writing credit.
Well, they did separate it out. They did separate the beginning out, which is that main part, into something called the Genetic Method, and then the song Chest Fever. And Robbie Robertson says, he says, I don't even remember like the lyrics. It was that song was a throwaway, but that seems to be the one that Levon Helm kind of was zeroing in on all the time. And again, you know what? When you go, I look through the discography there, Robbie Robertson didn't write every single song by the band. Towards the end, he started writing everything. But that's also maybe due to, substances and whatever was going on with the other band members.
Yeah, fair enough.
But if you look at these first couple albums, they're all writing songs. So, this whole thing that, Robbie Robertson wrote is writing and stealing. It's like, there are songs that are co-written by Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm on later albums.
I think what amplifies it, though, is that I guess because Robbie Robertson is the one that never really had a struggle for a buck. And,
that's a different.
And the idea is that, like, yes, he wrote the songs, but yes, he wrote the songs, but I guess the sound comes from those 5 guys and what they do.
Well, they all play, sure, but that's, you could say that about any group. You could say that about, Jeff Lynne. He writes all the songs, but he doesn't play like Bev Bevan, and any other group where there's like one main guy. Of course, the other people are doing what they're getting paid for. They're members of a band, and just like if somebody writes, just like when Bob Dylan gives them a song, right? Bob Dylan wrote it, but all these guys are performing it. But Bob Dylan's going to get the money for the publishing. I mean, that's just the way it goes.
I guess. I mean, the other thing
I have a hard time swallowing it. I could see that there's absolutely probably collaboration that went on, absolutely. Right. But to what extent does it fall into I helped write this, as opposed to I made a suggestion?
Well, the other thing you hear about all the time is that Robbie Roberts.
Kick it to Eric after.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in front of Eric.
No. I'm loving this. I'm letting him stew. I'm letting him stew and like work it up, and then we're going to unleash him.
But my other thing is too is like whenever you hear interviews about the writing of those songs, like, and again, it's on the Brown album, it's not on Big Pink, but like a song like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, like Robbie Robertson will directly say, I asked Levon to tell me stories about like, his family and what happens in Arkansas and all this stuff. So like, while maybe he didn't write the song, like he definitely provided a lot of context for then Robbie Robertson to build the song around. So you don't get what's the difference between
him? What's the difference between him reading a book about the Civil War or seeing a film, or someone telling him a story and then him writing a song about it? Again, yes, he's a source of inspiration, but did he write?
But that's not collaborative, though.
Was Virgil Caine his relative? Right.
But the idea of being a dirt farmer and what life was like as a dirt farmer, that came from like, I don't know.
But does that mean you get co-writing credit? Do you deserve that because you told stories and then why didn't Levon write a song about it then?
Fair enough.
Right? Yeah. Eric, weigh in on this. Get the weight.
No, I get shoulder. No, Dean, I get both points of view, but I have heard Levon Helm. I've seen or heard interviews with him where I'm all about experience and the life and like that kind of stuff. And yeah, he provided those ideas and stuff for somebody to come in but it's not like these guys were all, I'm sure that each one of them had experience and of their own that they could contribute, whatever. So the collaborative spirit is I something that I've always admired in a band, and but yeah, I mean, Robbie did have to take up the slack after a while, so that much I do, of course, agree with. I mean, he came in and of course, he got a lot of flack for it later on.
Yeah, and of course, all those years touring with Ronnie Hawkins and touring the country with Dylan, you get to know America as well, even though they're from North America and Canadian. And being with Levon Helm, sure, I'm sure he told stories and they absorbed it, but that would be no different.
And how much experience did they have together as a band? That's another thing too. It's like
rambles
all coming from different worlds or whatever. But still, they did extensive touring. That's what The Last Waltz was all about. We're done. We're this is it. We're exhausted. We're out. And these guys were like, you could see in the footage of that documentary just how frail everybody's looking, and they're still
worn,
and they're worn out, and they're still like obviously on the substances and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, everything kind of came to that head and just took its toll. But who knows? I mean, who knows exactly how much input?
Yeah, and is Garth Brooks, is Garth Hudson like, maybe he's okay with I did this, but he's not the one complaining. Levon Helm is complaining for Garth Hudson, and Garth Hudson could certainly open his mouth if he wants.
I think part of it too is like if you look at what happened to the other 3 guys, and again, I'm sure substances contributed to it in their lifestyle, but I think if you look at what happened to the other 4 of them were like almost destitute, right? Like Levon Helm started this awesome thing called the Rambles, but it was because it was like out of cash. So I think there's probably some sour grapes there that like Robbie Robertson never hurt for a dime, and the other four of them were like.
Just to tie this in a bow, why did Robbie Robertson never hurt for a dime? Because he did soundtrack work. He wrote songs. Like he if anything, he strengthened the case that he was the guy that did this stuff, because he produced other artists. He was playing on all different albums. He collaborated with Neil Diamond on Beautiful Noise and did 2 great solo albums where he's the lyricist, and the proof is in the pudding.
And to piggyback what Dean's saying, he also was a major sort of sponge for inspiration. I mean, you look at like a lot of his solo work. He was working with bands like U2, sounding like U2, trying to adapt their sound and trying to incorporate that into what he was writing, and and it was brilliant. It was.
You could say that was the same thing. You could say that as much as he took inspiration from Levon Helm. Yeah, when he on his first solo album, he did some songs with U2, and they're very much very much U2 sounding and
very eclectic. Peter Gabriel, U2. I mean, obviously, they all work with Daniel Lanois, so that was the sort of the glue right there. But but on his subsequent work, he would do the same thing, right? He would still be working with other. I mean, all the way up to his last solo record, which was that group Dawes.
Yeah,
that was another band that he took into the fold, and that he was really interested in these guys, and even playing with like Trent Reznor and collaborating with him, and
I didn't
on his a Clairvoyant album.
So how to be a clairvoyant? Did we change your mind on this, Chris?
I mean, I get the argument. I sometimes what I feel like though is it's not so much that he doesn't deserve the credit for writing the songs, is that I feel like it's not, and maybe that I came on. It's not. I definitely think he was the primary songwriter, and he came up with the primary ideas and all that kind of stuff. I also feel like sometimes when you see him in interviews, I almost feel like he diminishes the importance of the other 4 guys sometimes, and that's the part that I have a problem.
You can definitely have an ego.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean,
that's for sure.
And as great as the movie The Last Waltz is, you see that ego.
But Levon Helm had a bigger ego too. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that he was a very strong singer, a formidable presence in the band, singing and playing drums. And I think that had a lot to do with it too. His, let's be honest. I think he had the strongest voice out of all the members. They all,
100%. Rick Danko though was pretty strong too.
Yeah,
in a different way. Yeah.
Yes.
But if they didn't, I mean, bottom line to tie this up, if they didn't make any deals where everybody shares songwriting credit, that's the way the cookie crumbles. I'm sorry.
Fair enough.
If they weren't able to parlay anything after that, it's not Robbie Robertson's fault that he became in demand and collaborated with Scorsese. It's not like he said. And he did work. Rick Danko appeared on both of Robbie Robertson's solo albums, and so did Garth Hudson. It's not like he kicked them to the curb. I mean, he didn't support them, but they worked with him willingly. When he made the call. So anyway, back to 1968. Before all this happened, when they were a happy quintet of people just living together and creating music. I think we have to remember 1968. We were still knee deep in psychedelia, and big experimentation. Right, the Beatles had kind of unleashed what was possible to do in the studio, and a lot of bands were kind of running with that. And here comes these guys. They dress like farmers, or they work in the fields, and they're decidedly low tech. They don't go for overdubbing. They record everything live. As much as possible. Which probably was what the refreshing breath of fresh air was at this time. Like I said, when everything was incense and peppermints and strawberry alarm clock, you have these guys that are just kind of regular folk singing about regular things and America that's either idealized or what used to be, perhaps, or what would be in someone's dreams.
I was going to pose that question. Yeah, I was going to pose that question. What exactly is it about the music itself that it was so inspirational? Certainly, a lot of people sort of gravitated to all these big groups too, getting together and like the folk and this kind of thing, and Leon Russell and all these guys, and of course, the whole Mad Dogs and Englishmen thing with Joe Cocker and this whole those big huge bands that would go out on tour and. but the kind of music that they were doing seemed to be very much stemming from what the band were doing here with this odd, to listen to this album right from the get-go. It's like, it's great, but it's not exactly, I wouldn't say the most it's a good album, but it's production wise, it's not, we're not like Dean was saying, it's not like,
it's not the best sounding album ever.
Not the best sounding album. And it's like production wise, you don't have all of this sort of thing going on. There is no, wall of sound thing happening. Brian Wilson, all these, bands trying to do something here. We're, like it's very, very much in the room, very warm, very sort of, which is a whole other side, to that kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, I dig it. And that's what for me makes I can like both, like that kind of thing. And I think, this was one of those formidable albums that kind of set the path for that. Chris, you had something to say.
I almost wonder if it's like the same kind of thing, like, back in the early 90s in 1991 when Nevermind came out, and it was kind of like this, like, genre shifting, pop culture shifting kind of record where, like, okay, we've got all of these like pop metal artists, and we've taken this like pop metal, hair metal sound as far as it can go, and now it's just becoming like almost a caricature of ourselves. So now we need to have this thing that's, it's just simple, like three dudes playing punk rock and not any of the just, telling, presenting it with the music and, kind of getting back to what is simple and good about rock and roll. And I wonder if the band in 68, it's the same kind of thing where you've got like the Strawberry Alarm Clock and the 13th Floor Elevators and all of these like psychedelic bands. And it's almost like you have this like dirge of that kind of stuff. And people, the Summer of Love became so blown up, and it almost became a caricature of itself. Like, and this is almost like one of those things, like, here are these dudes up in Woodstock with Dylan and just kind of, living this like idyllic, chill lifestyle, recording this simple music, and kind of like, let's go get back to what is beautiful about music. And that's the songwriting. Yeah. So I wonder if it has that same type of effect that like Nevermind had 23 years later or whatever it was.
I would say probably, because one of the things is when the band actually went to New York City to record with the producer, Robbie Robertson's, the guy's like, well, how do you want this to sound? Robbie Robertson's like, I want it to sound like it sounded in the basement. Right. So they really didn't want that, because you can get a very polished, this could have been closer to something, had it had slicker production, it might have been something closer to like Creedence Clearwater Revival. Because they're not that far. They're not. The only difference probably is the production. Creedence is very close to this kind of stuff. It's they're more swampy, but the intentions are the same, right? It's that vision of America, or I don't want to use the word nostalgic, but it kind of it feels like it harkens back, even though this is not really a style of music that kind of existed. Really, it's kind of folky, but kind of not, and it's an amalgamation of so many different things, which makes it feel sometimes like it's old timey, right?
Yeah,
but decidedly not, because I think we should start talking about some of the songs on here. We talked a little bit, we talked about Chest Fever a little bit, which is just that is a nasty song. Like, it's just it's dirty. It's, and I love it. I love listening to that, because it's just like, yeah, there's that kind of folky longing stuff, but then these guys can also, crank up the distortion on that organ and just let it rip.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of the organ work on this album is phenomenal. It's just,
it's so different.
Again, that almost adds this sort of psychedelic element to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it absolutely does. Wheels on Fire.
And I mean, there is so many different little increments of there's a little bit of jazz here, a little bluegrass, some soul, some
New Orleans style jazz.
New Orleans style jazz. You got gospel. I Shall Be Released, songs of that. It's just, I mean, it's just the combination of that kind of thing, which is some of my very favorite types of music, is those elements together, that mishmash of just different genres and just going with it.
And this was them figuring this out, kind of like, they have three vocalists. So basically, you've got Richard Manuel, you've got Rick Danko, and you have Levon Helm. And what I wrote, the way I kind of separate them, I wrote that Levon Helm is like the country soul of the band.
Yep.
Rick Danko kind of has a little bit more of the angelic voice. He kind of, and Richard Manuel's kind of the melancholy.
Yeah.
He kind of has that kind of, he always has, his songs are about people that are kind of in trouble or, kind of going through something or a love that's lost, so you have these three very strong tools that you can leverage, which they didn't really, like, I think, like Chris said at the beginning, they didn't leverage it as much on this album because a lot of it is Richard Manuel.
Yep.
And sometimes it's, for me, I was listening, I'm like, is that Rick Danko?
Yeah, very almost. Yeah.
They're very close. I'm like, I almost couldn't tell. But then when you hear Rick Danko sing, it's like, oh, okay, because he's just soars.
Yeah, he's got that high voice.
Yeah, he soars a little bit higher. But yeah, Richard Manuel is probably one of the the prime songwriters. He co-wrote Tears of Rage with Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan had the lyrics, and Richard Manuel's like, put the music to it. And then Rick Danko co-wrote with Dylan. He co-wrote This Wheels on Fire, which was a hit. It was a minor hit for Brian Auger and Trinity, which is a UK. It was a hit in the UK. Which brings me to a question, or maybe I'm going to lament, and you guys can pick up on it. But back then, which you don't really hear about it now, and Eric and I just talked about it in the Huey Lewis episode. When we talked about Heart and Soul, the song Heart and Soul, there were 2 other versions of it that had come out like a year or 2 or 3 before. You never hear of this anymore. Like the band did This Wheels on Fire, and that's their version, but it was done like within the same year by another band, and it kind of got more popular. You don't really hear of artists like covering songs in a short span of, well, let me take a crack at it, right? That doesn't really happen anymore.
No, that doesn't. But it happened a lot back then, and not just with them. It happened with Rod Stewart and Elton John, Cat Stevens, and oh God, I can't. I'm blanking on the reggae artist that did Wild World, but like there was a few of them like that. And I don't know. I guess
Joe Cocker and the Beatles with a little help from my friends. It seemed like it almost seemed like these songs were kind of just out there. There wasn't this feeling of ownership. Oh, this is Beyonce's new song or so and so's, whatever it is. And no one's gonna try and do it. It seemed more like the songs were kind of there, and if somebody wanted to take a crack at it, it's like, let us do it. We don't care that you just literally did it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I wonder if it's because artists didn't own their publishing in the same way that they do now, maybe. Or is it that they just don't want to share the credit, or the loss of popularity, or the loss of album sales, or
I don't know. It's I was thinking about it. I'm like, there used to be like all this thing of someone would have a version of a song, or like pretty close nearby, like this and the Brian Auger one were like, I think in the same year, and theirs was in the UK and it charted. But it's just a different.
Producers, you got to remember too, producers at the time were into music. Right. A lot of these or management, big record company execs, some of them some of them actually liked music. They weren't just, you know what I mean? Like, so if they hear a good song, okay, hey, check this out. They gave it to another artist to do or something, that happened a lot, it's not, everything is sort of, well, you got to have a hit or else, kind of thing. It's just very,
and 13 songwriters on a song nowadays.
That's right.
I also think you're talking about a time where music was much more collegial, where artists were like jumping on and off each other's records, and high tide raises all ships. Like I've even heard, to go back to that example, I'm remembering now, when Jimmy Cliff recorded Wild World, Cat Stevens said, his version's better than mine, or his version is just as good as mine. Like, I don't know that you'd have an artist say something like that in the year 2025. Like,
if anything, they'd be suing left and right.
They'd be pissed off and say this is the inferior version or something. Like,
they were humble enough.
Right. And there's that respect for other artists and their artistry.
Yeah. So. And the thing about this album is, and maybe that's part of its appeal, is it has a homemade feel to it. Maybe because it is very underproduced. It is almost, I don't know that this producer did a whole lot outside of hitting record, and per his marching orders of, we want this to sound like it sounded in the bass. We want that kind of raw, laid back, thrown together, sound, but you know what? You're only going to get it with guys that have played together for as long as they did and been in backing bands together and have so tight. And that's the thing about the band is that, you know, their debut album was in '68, but they were playing together in one form or another since like '61.
Yeah.
You know, and working towards it. So by the time they start recording proper, they can just play this shit. Like it's not, you know, there's not this, oh, we got to go into an overdub. I mean, they would get into that. It would, you know, things would ramp up and get much more, you know, complex and embellished. But this was just kind of like, yeah, he just hit record and let us go. And we got it from here.
And the songs were written. I mean, all they had to do was go in the studio. Everything was written. They wrote it up in Woodstock and they went over and just hit, like you said, hit record. I mean, and as simple as the production is, I do think, like the thing, I don't know, maybe my wife's car has a better stereo than mine, and I was in her car this afternoon, and I had it turned up, and the thing that stuck out to me, and I forget which song it was I was listening to at the time, but I don't know, the crack of the drum and the bass, I thought that the low end on the record was really good. Like, I don't know. I to me, it had that thump that I like to hear on the low end. So
yeah. I was listening to the remaster, and I didn't it didn't sound like any, you know,
no.
It didn't
We Can
open
Talk.
up
That was the one I was
anything,
listening to.
you know? Yeah.
It
didn't feel like it had opened up or anything, but
miking is very important too. There's, you know, the positioning of mics, and you know, you think that it's like, oh, how hard could that be? But you're talking about, you know, bleeding and then all that kind of stuff. So they have to position this shit just right, even if it is somewhat underproduced, that, you know, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But but at least you're getting a full sound. You know, just
you're
getting
hear everything
exactly what they're playing in the room. So yeah, I like that. So yep.
And then I think it's safe to say that there's no song that embodies the band more than The Weight. You know, I think they kind of hit it out on their first, you know, I think that would kind of become the blueprint. I think really that song kind of, I think, carried that has like the band formula encapsulated in one song. That I think that was, if I took anything away from this album, I think I took that The Weight was kind of the blueprint that would carry them forward in feel and in understanding what the formula was, and you know that you know that Levon Helm can anchor a song, because he, like I said, we don't really hear too much from him on this album, but this song is just magic. I mean, it's just like it's something else.
As played out as it is, it's probably like one of my favorite songs from the 60s, 100%. Like, I've heard it a million times. I've seen it in 100 movies. Like, I still remember the first time I saw Easy Rider and them, you know, that being played while the two of them are riding the motorcycles and stuff. Like, as much as I've heard that song, to me, it is one of the best songs of the 60s. And honestly, to your point, I think very shortly after this record came out, I think a version just as strong, the Staple Singers did a version of it that's fantastic on one of their records. That's unbelievably well done.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's just, you know, them really getting lightning in a bottle, but really dialing it in. And I think why it's so, I think before I kick it to you, Eric, I think why it's so played out, but why it's so listenable at the same time, and why you never get tired of it, is because it's so simple. You know, there's not a lot of stuff that is in there that's going to get played out. It's like, oh, I've heard this kind of, you know, weird stuff. You know, I've heard this before. Like, it's just a very simple and direct song. It's a very basic framework. You know, there's some acoustic guitar, there's some drums, very light bass, and feel, and that's and a story being told.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's like a poem, you know, right? Or it's like a stanza of each thing, and it's like a different story within those stanzas. You know, I'm waiting for that Rick Danko, like, you know, wait a minute, Chester, you know, like, you know, like you wait for that. As many times as you've heard it, you're still loving it though. You still, and as many times as you hear it live with now groups today doing it.
Yep.
You know, it never gets old. You know, you always, you know, and to comment on the, you know, the Staple Singers, I thought it was a stroke of genius that was it Scorsese or Robbie Robertson's idea to bring them in.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a great scene in that movie.
On The Last Waltz, because they didn't get that footage live. So they actually recreate, you know, they did a mock-up, whatever, and they brought them in, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, that's a great version too.
Combine the two, was just fantastic. Yeah.
Mavis was so awesome on that version.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob Dylan was madly in love with Mavis Staples. And he wanted to marry her. He was like obsessed with her at some point, I think in the late 60s or early 70s. He really was like in love with her. And she was the one that got away.
And I mean, in credit to the band, speaking of Dylan, just the idea that they were smart enough to say, all right, Dylan got us this far, but now we need to do our own thing. Like the genius and the to recognize that they were strong enough to do this on their own. And they gave Dylan the nod. He painted the album cover, and there's a couple of songs that he's tied to, but not any that he ever released on his own. Unless I'm wrong, but I don't think
I Shall Be Released. He did record,
but never. But did the band put it out first?
Yes.
Right. So
yes, this was the first version. He did it later.
And then the only other thing that kind of speaks to Big Pink is if you look at the cover of the album that Dylan painted, there are 6 musicians on the cover, not 5.
But only 5 people in the band, and then there's a mysterious 6th person. Yeah, they could have this group could have easily cashed in and leaned. I don't know how Dylan would have felt about it. He probably had more respect for these guys that they did what they did because they would regroup for Planet Waves and they would retour again and just whole bunch of stuff. But these guys are not. I don't even want to call them Dylan acolytes because this is not anything really like a Dylan album. Like they're associated with Dylan. They worked with Dylan. They're friends with Dylan. They wrote with Dylan. But there's still something. They're something different. It's not the same.
No, it's definitely not. It doesn't sound. It's
even
not
when
like
they're adapting his stuff, right? It's still not the same.
No.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just also one of the things about this group too is everybody's like a virtuoso expert musician.
Yep.
But they all play down. They play to the songs, which is what I love. There's no flashy, at this point, Robbie Robertson was a really good from touring with Ronnie Hawkins and learning that guitar style. He actually was a pretty speedy guitarist. And he said, I actually kind of learned how to back that off and just play play phrases that are needed and just go where the music takes you,
I always enjoyed his texture work much more than, than any speed or, just lead guitar. Just his little brush strokes in the songs. I always enjoyed more.
Yeah, his phrase. He has a certain tone. Phrases.
Yep.
Yeah, he has that trembling tone too. A lot of times, love that.
The guitar almost took a back seat, like you said. It's just like little textures and touches.
There's probably a lot more keyboard. I would think than guitar, but it's there.
And they could have unleashed Garth Hudson, and because you could see how avant-garde. It kind of goes there. I think it lets the listener know that we're not country bumpkins. We have the chops to do what we want to do, but we choose to do it this way. And I think that's the thing about the band is they come off as like these dirt farmers or whatever. Bumpkins, but they're not. These guys are expert musicians and they play together so long that they know each other and they can just kind of and feel it out. And that's, I think that's what you get with this is that kind of, it feels like you're listening to a group that's been around a while. It doesn't feel like a debut album.
No, not at all.
No.
I mean,
you're wondering why didn't they make more out before this? It's hard to believe that,
Yeah. I mean, pre-Dylan, they were playing clubs on the Jersey Shore. It wasn't like they were doing anything really that noteworthy at all.
Yeah, right. Doing residencies and whatnot, and just kind of, it's and for me, for someone that's going to listen to the album, for me, I kind of when I gave it multiple listens, and for me, the album kind of starts at a certain level, and it ramps up. This, I don't think this album out of the gate doesn't burst out of the gate. I think it. It kind of starts and as each song we get progressively, each song kind of ups the stakes. And then once you get, after you get to the weight and everything after that, it just kind of, it side 2, the weight closes out side 1. And then like side 2, I think just kind of takes off. Long Black Veil, which is a cover, but We Can Talk, which is great. And again, like Chest Fever, This Wheels on Fire, like they really just kind of they're kind of like racing to the finish. They really kind of like put the pedal to the metal, and then you get to I Shall Be Released at the end. It's like the perfect closing song. It's like like manna from above, manna from heaven.
Yeah,
that was just kind of laid at their feet. Amazing.
Yeah, it's a great tune.
Amazing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a slow burn, but it is. But you're right. It each song just gets progressively better, and it's like almost as if you could look at this album and this could be a great set list for a show. They start off very subtly, and then each song just builds to something something special. And that's a lot of bands take that cue today. I think a lot of the indie bands out there kind of do this kind of thing where certain songs are just start off slow and then it kind of just by the end of it you're just gushing tears or something because it's so beautifully played, or it's almost spiritual in a way. A lot of this stuff is almost like you're going to church, and it's like
yeah.
So
and side 2 really modulates. I mean, it's kind of like up tempo, little slower, up tempo, little slower, up tempo, little slower. They really kind of like hook you in, but the songs also just kind of just like I said, even the slower ones like Long Black Veil and Lonesome Susie, they all kind of fit in, just because of the stuff that came. Like Chest Fever was such a rave up.
Yep.
That you want something like Lonesome Susie after it, just to kind of like kind of exhale. And then all of a sudden you get ramped up again for This Wheels on Fire, and then you get I Shall Be Released. So what I like about this album is just also the way the tracks are arranged. It's just really kind of hooks. It really hooks you in. It kind of starts off slow, and it's kind of like you're going up a hill. And then once you get to the top, you get to the weight, and then you start racing down to the finish. You kind of crest that hill. So
yeah.
Yeah. Are you guys ready for our segment of It's Three Truths and a Lie? You ready for it?
Let's do it.
Although Chris, he mentioned a lot of the stuff I have here. He's already like went ahead and mentioned. So this could be like the shortest one ever. But here we go. Here's the debut of the 3 Truths and a Lie theme song. Here we go.
3 truths, 1 fib. Oh my, oh my. Secrets out. It's do or die. Pick with care, give it a try. Find the lie before bye-bye.
Find the lie before bye-bye. Here we go. 3 truths and a lie. If you're new to the show, I'm going to read 4 statements. In this case, 3 of them are true. 1 is a lie. You guys will have to figure out the truth or the lies. So only one of these is a lie, and I need to know which one it is. Here we go. I'm going to read 4 statements. And like I said, 3 are true, 1 is a lie. Statement number 1, Elton John's song Leave On was inspired by Levon Helm. Number 2, the group declined to do any interviews for a year after this album came out. They didn't talk to anybody. Number 3, the band became the first North American rock band to be on the cover of Time in 1970. Number 4, the band recorded their last album, not this one, but their last one at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house in California. Here we go again. Number 1, Elton John's song Leave On was inspired by Levon Helm, although written by Bernie Taupin, so not really Elton John. But anyway. Number 2, the group declined to do any interviews for a year after this album came out, increasing the mystery about this nameless, faceless band. Number 3, the band became the first North American rock band to be on the cover of Time in 1970. They were on the cover, but this time I'm saying they were the first North American rock band. Number 4, the band recorded their last album at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. Peace, baby. We'll have Eric go first. The Candyman can.
Goodness.
So one of these is a lie.
Right. Okay. So for some reason, I think the Sammy Davis Jr. thing is did happen. I don't know why, but I think that's. But I'm going to go with Levon. The Levon.
Levon. Okay.
I don't know. I don't think that Levon Helm is the inspiration for that song.
Okay,
but that's my pick.
Cool. So you're going with the first statement.
The first
Elton John song Levon was inspired by Levon Helm.
Yeah.
All right. Christopher Clark.
I don't think they recorded Islands at Sammy Davis's house, so I think that's the lie.
You think that's the lie? The band recorded their last album at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. Okay. You at home, lock in your answers. Let us know on social media where you came out on this. Did you get through my subterfuge and figure it out, or did I snag you? You can do that on Instagram, Facebook, and the YouTube. And while you're at all of those, like, subscribe, and follow as appropriately as it would be. Here we go. Let's cut away let's separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say. This is the truth. Here's the truth here. They did become the first North American rock band to be on the cover of Time magazine in 1970. Yes, North American or Canadian. Either you can use either one interchangeably, but North America is Canada's part of it. Truth number 2. It's true. The group did decline to do any interviews for a year after Music from Big Pink came out. They kept the mystery going. Like, who are and it kind of helped stoke the fires of interest of who are these guys? We don't know who, we don't know what this is about. Who are they? We see the picture, but we don't know. Let's see. One of these is a truth and one of these is a lie. The last two we have. Let's go with the final truth. The final truth is, yes, Elton John's song Levon was inspired by Levon Helm. Like I said, the inspiration of this group was far and wide in songwriters, and it wasn't necessarily about Levon Helm, but the title was inspired by Levon Helm, which means that the lie is the band recorded their last album at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. That's mostly a lie because they would record their second album at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house.
That's right. Yeah. I knew they recorded it as a mansion. I realized it was Sammy Davis.
It was Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. I went on, they actually gave the...
partially right.
Well, it's a lie because I changed it.
Yeah.
It's not true. I forgot where I was reading it. They gave the address. So I went on Google Maps and I looked at it. It's not a mansion. It's a house. It's like a house on the street.
Yeah.
Back then it was, it's up in the hills because when you go on Google Maps, you can go down the road. And I'm like, I want to see how far it is to like a street, and you're winding down this canyon. But it was almost looks like it's on a back street, at the time. But Judy Garland also owned that house at one time.
Yep. And they recorded in the pool house.
Yeah. But that was a lie. They did not record their last album at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house.
I would have to think the last album was recorded at their studio Shangri-La.
Shangri-La
somehow survived the horrible fires that California's dealing with right now.
Knock on wood. Amazing that it has. But they this is a sad tale of a band that would really devolve or indulge in the excesses of the rock and roll lifestyle. All of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe not Garth Hudson. We never heard anything about him, but all the other guys, alcohol, cocaine, you name it. They were doing it,
they absolutely were.
That kind of splintered them. Kind of the formula wore thin after a while too. They were just kind of like, we're kind of known for the weight, and that's kind of what we do. But what else is there? But you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this album and the album that follows are like a 1-2 punch.
They really are.
They did I think they did 4 albums in a row. And then went to work with Dylan and did Before the Flood and the Basement Tape. Like there's so much stuff that came out, and then eventually 4 years elapsed, and then they got to doing other albums, Southern Cross and what's it called, Northern
Light Southern Cross,
Light Southern Cross. And by then the mojo was kind of gone, right? Yeah, Robbie was literally writing at that point, was writing everything. And not to say that there was not some really good stuff on there. I mean, Ophelia's on their later work and. A whole bunch of other great stuff,
and they can still deliver live. Like if you go on Spotify and find their whole run of shows of the Academy of Music, I think I want to say 73 or 74 is on Spotify, and they're fantastic. They're playing with orchestra that Alan Toussaint wrote the charts for and stuff. It's really good stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no doubt. These guys were made for the road. I mean, that's the thing. They're these, and that's what they loved, and that's what Levon Helm loved. These guys, and all these guys except for Robbie, really, and there, there's a whole other conversation about, did the band really want to break up, or was it Robbie Robertson that instigated it, and self-preservation act for him, but for this album to come out in 1968, it feels like it's something of a later time. It feels like 1972, like when the singer-songwriter era like kicked off, like when all that stuff, James Taylor and all that stuff with Gordon Lightfoot was all bubbling under or bubbling up. It feels like this would have been of that time, but it was well before that. Like I said, during.
Well, interestingly enough, you mentioned that, but when you listen to some of their early work, Gordon Lightfoot, James Taylor, way overproduced stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's very, the late 60s when they were doing that, it's like they, recording with big arrangements and things like that. And it's just not what, so I'm wondering, this could have been an inspiration for just sort of that grounded feel, so more, just sort of off the cuff or in the room kind of, environment, that vibe. I just, Yeah.
I mean, you think, there's a quote here from music writer Ian MacDonald. I don't know who he is, but he called it the most influential record of its time, probably the most influential in rock history. Is that an overstatement? Citing its influence on the Beatles, Elton John, Traffic, Fairport Convention, the Byrds, the Grateful Dead, Little Feat, and 1970s country rock in general. When they say the Beatles, I'm thinking Rocky Raccoon.
Right. I'm thinking like the White Album. The White
Album, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Mother Nature's Son.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know why. It doesn't sound like it, but it does.
No, but that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Even George Harrison had said he forgot what song he wrote. In like 73 or whenever he was writing. And he said, I wrote this song picturing Levon Helm singing it.
I mean, to your point, I mean, you think about like how influential it is. Like if you really look at, and again, I know you guys did an episode on The Last Waltz, but if you think of everybody that was at, at Winterland for that show, like in some way, shape or form, they were touched or influenced in some way by those five guys. And most of them going back to 68, right? Like Dylan and Clapton and Ringo and
Neil
like
Young.
Neil Young, all those
Tony
cats. Yeah. All those cats picked up on them within that first record, picked up Big Pink and had their mind blown. So, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's the most influential, but it's definitely top 10, if not top 5 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's wild that a lot of people don't, you never hear this in conversations.
Yeah.
You hear bigger selling albums.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Right. We talk about, 10 million, 7 million out the door. This was only at the time, like, this was kind of like hitting a single in baseball. Really. It was kind of,
it's like
they just got it. They got it out of the infield and they got to first base, and I don't know that any of their albums really were monsters. I mean, the one after this, I don't even know if there's any sales.
I would think the Brown Album and Stage Fright did pretty well.
Yeah, I don't see any offhand any sales.
They
sales
stayed
stuff,
well below the radar then. Yeah,
because that was 69. Their follow up was a year later, so it was just literally kind of that whole. I love when bands have that whole like prolific streak, like Zeppelin did it 2 albums in 1 year. They were just kind of like cranking stuff out, and then all of a sudden they stop and take a break. In this case, that was kind of like the death knell for them. But
right,
this is music of a certain time.
Yeah,
also.
Yeah.
And just to your point, Dean, the first 3 records have certifications. After that, you don't have any certifications. So Big Pink went gold. The Brown Album went platinum. Stage Fright went gold. And then after that, you had Planet Waves and the Basement Tapes, which were both recorded with Dylan. Those are both gold records. And Planet Waves went up to number 1 on the charts.
Yeah, for like a week or something like that, or not very long. But we're not talking massive album sales here.
Not at all.
We're not talking, platinum is just 1 million, and gold is 500,000. So, it's I guess it's puzzling right? That this could, people can cite this as being so influential. Well, who bought it?
Right, but
yeah,
some of the most
within the circle of artists, I would say, probably more so than the actual public. But to hear some of these songs being covered and that kind of thing, and
some of the most important records in history they don't sell a lot of records. Like if you think about a different genre of music, but when people talk about the Ramones, they'll say things like the Ramones didn't sell a lot of records, but every kid that ever picked up a Ramones record or went to see the Ramones live started a band, right? So how many, and Elton John, how many records did Elton John sell in those, if you think about,
not a lot.
Holy Connection went platinum. And then if you listen to, what's the one, Madman Across the Water, there's still that influence there. Like, so maybe they didn't sell millions of records themselves, but the people that listened to them went on to sell millions of records. So they left their print on the Planet songbook, even if it wasn't.
And if you were listening to as a consumer, you were just sort of like be in a little clique or some little, like you're in a private little club listening to this stuff. Maybe, it's underground. It's, it's like, to be a fan of that at the time must have been great.
And there's just to close it out, there's an interesting adjunct semi-documentary that's kind of peripheral to this called, it's called The New Basement Tapes, which I really love. It was a Showtime documentary. I don't even know if it might be on disc, but it's about Big Pink. It's about when Dylan was there. It's mainly about Dylan's prolific spurt of writing that he had. But they interview Robbie Robertson. They talk about, they're at Big Pink. They talk about it. What was going on, the vibe that was going on. Again, it's mainly about Dylan and all these lyrics that he wrote that are unfinished. He gave them to this group of artists, the guy from My Morning Jacket and the guy from Mumford & Sons, and let them finish the songs and write the songs. And the documentary is about them doing that. And then it's also up at Big Pink. And then there's, might be some, archival stuff of Dylan talking or whatever, but then they have new interviews too. So if you could seek that out, it's a very interesting watch.
Yeah, it was great.
It kind of connects everything. And it, like I said, it's kind of an adjunct to this, but let's wind this up. Chris, what songs you keeping on? What songs are keepers off this?
So to me, the ones that always stick out to me are, I think Tears of Rage is a great album opener. I really like Caledonia Mission. We Can Talk, I think, is just a great up-tempo tune.
Yeah.
I love the keyboard sound on I'm going to end up listening like most of the record. I love We Can Talk. I love Long Back Veil. Chest Fever is great. And then, basically all of side 2. And I Shall Be Released, I think, is a great closer. And that one always reminds me of one of the best experiences I ever had as a teacher, working with kids on a show. Was we did hair in my old school. And as part of the house music, as part of the show starting, when people were coming into the house, I would play 60s music and the kids would walk around all dressed up like hippies, just like introducing themselves to the audience. And I just remember looking over at my students walking around like that while I Shall Be Released play. So I always think of that performance. Nice. But yeah, so basically side 2 and side 2, The Wait. And most of it, I feel like I'm listening to everything gushing. So
that's okay. We unabashedly gush from time to time. So, Eric, what do you got?
I don't know.
Same thing?
I don't
Same thing, the whole thing?
I mean, I don't, the whole thing. Right. I like To Kingdom Come. I like Tears of Rage. Of course, The Wait. I mean, it's just a perfect album from start to finish. It's just one of those albums where, it's like a bunch of ripe fruit and you don't know what, you know what I mean? Like
it just, every spin, you get sucked in more.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with all of the above as well, but like stuff like In a Station, it's just kind of like slice of life. These guys, their songs are always stories. There's always a character who did something. He's on the run from something, or he loves someone. Like this, that's what I think is what's really engaging about the band, is that the songs are really stories. It's and they're well, they use they're well researched, from whatever names or locations they use, and I think that's what kind of makes this, and it's almost sometimes it's like a travelogue through America also, and I think that's what the band really kind of captured maybe at that point in America's, in the 60s, with the turmoil, the Vietnam War, psychedelia. And this was kind of like a respite or an oasis from that. And it's like, we're calling back to maybe a different time, or we're saying that there's still things like this that happen now. And we're kind of the purveyors of it, with all this, crazy stuff, free your mind. There's still these real things that go on here.
I mean, and very reflective of where they were writing and working. Like if you go up to Woodstock, even now, I mean, I was there, right before COVID, it's still like a very chill, very, hip little spot. Like even as it's become a little bit more, hipstery and,
yes,
nouveau and all that kind of stuff, but it's still like this very chill, very simple, and I think it's also a product of its environment and being recorded in a spot that was still kind of a little bit of a secret in the Hudson Valley, 54 years ago, 55 years ago.
Yeah. And Big Pink is still there, by the way. It's still a privately owned house,
and you can get it on Airbnb if you want to stay there for the weekend. I think it's like $1,000.
Yeah, well,
really? Wow.
Yep.
I'd rather just drive by and take a picture.
That's I really still want to do that. I haven't done it yet, and I still want to do that.
Yeah, we should road trip it. That's
I'm down.
We'll do a rock and roll road trip. 3324.
I'm down.
We'll just drive. It's like 2 hours from me, so
yeah, me too.
So we could just shoot up there, photo bomb it, and then be back for lunch. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Go ahead and find this on whatever streaming service, or if you want to download it or buy it, any way you want to obtain it, go ahead and grab it and give it a listen. It's certainly worthy of a place in your collection. So if you want to pick up a copy somewhere and add it to it, that's always nice. It'll make it'll fit nice. And like I said, there's so many different facets to rock and roll, that we kind of sometimes get into a little prog thing, or we get into a classic rock thing. Like, we kind of get into some of the grooves, but then when we kind of come out of it and you realize how rich the landscape was of rock music, and it's very easy for people to dismiss rock and roll music as just that, but all you got to do is barely scratch the surface, and there's so many subtle nuances and splinters, and especially around this time, and especially as we went into the 70s, when music really splintered into genres and subgenres and subgenres of it. It's a great time to experience music, or it's a great time to go back and research and find this stuff that at this time Led Zeppelin was about to unleash the hammer of the gods on everybody. Like all this stuff was existing at the same time, but all of it is unique in its own way, and accessible and great to listen to in its own way. So, I guess what we're saying, what I'm saying is that rock music isn't just one thing. It's rock and roll is a pretty big umbrella.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That everybody's under, and there's so many different things in there. And we're I'm sad that we lost Garth Hudson. He was the last one. We lost two basically in a year.
Yep.
But we want you to go out and find this album, or just go get the greatest hits of the band. Start there. If you think this is too much, the best of the band is easy.
Yeah.
That was my entree. After I saw The Last Waltz, I went out and got the best of the band, and then just kind of went from there. So any way you slice it, if you like The Weight and you like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down and something, the band is they don't stray too far from that. They kind of that's their stock and trade, and that's where they stayed. They didn't go wild.
And Levon Helm's solo records towards the end of his life have a very similar, like, take that bluegrass country flavor from the band.
He definitely went for it. Kind of reemerged and kind of started to be active again not long before he passed. So that's going to do it. We thank you for joining us. You can find us, like I said, on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can go leave comments there. If you want to watch the video version, it's on YouTube. You can kind of see what we look like and see the funny faces we make when we talk. But that's going to do it. So for Mr. Christopher Clark, thank you so much for recommending this and for kind of pushing it to the forefront. And we hadn't done, we did The Last Waltz, I think, in year one So yeah, thank you for kind of reminding us that we had to get back to the band.
Well, thank you for taking my suggestion. I'm really glad we got to do this record.
Yeah, and Eric is going to be firmly affixed and seated to that comfy brown couch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my slick new gaming office chair, and we will be waiting here. We will not move until we see you again in about a week or so. So for Christopher, for Eric, this has been Dean, and we will catch you on the flip side.